Hi, I'm Donovan Keith. I'm a product manager for capsules at Maxon, and in this video I want to talk about how to use the alignment node and the evaluate spline node inside of scene nodes in order to create an align to spline style effect. Here I've got an arrow that is animating along the length of a spline that I've dashed using these two nodes. Now, if you wanted to do this in the Objects Manager in a more standard way, you would just create the spline that you want to follow. You'd add something like a cone object or something to animate along the path, and then you would add an animation align to spline node. Once you've got that, you would pick the spline path that you want to orient along, and then you can animate the position. And in order to get it to orient as well, you would turn on tangential. So if this works for you, if you just want to animate an existing object along an existing spline in the Objects Manager, this is the solution you should use. But if you're trying to build custom geometry and it's important for some of that geometry to align to a spline, and you're doing that in scene nodes, well then what I'm about to show you becomes important. Then I'd also just like to perhaps not apologize, but give you a heads up that I've got a cold right now, so if my voice is a little bit off or if I'm clearing my throat, that is why. So to build this sort of align to spline in scene nodes, what I'm going to do is create an object. So it's either going to be a node spline or a nodes mesh. So I'm hitting Shift-C to open Commander, and I'm going to search for nodes spline. And because I want to see a spline and I want to align to a spline, I might as well start with a spline. And then I'm just going to go ahead and open up the node editor here. And I'm just going to dock this into my user interface. And I'm going to hide the attributes manager here because it's sort of redundant with this one that we've got. First things first, I need to create a spline of some sort. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a formula. So I've just double clicked and I'm going to type in formula. And I'm going to drag my formula's geometry output over here to this wire. I can accomplish the same thing by tapping the Q key. So now I've got a path. And if I want, I can increase my T minimum to something like -3 and my T maximum to something like 3 to just give me a little bit more spline to work with. Next up, I want to create a shape that I am going to be sort of moving along this path. And the simplest one that I could think of is something called the linear arrow. So if I double click and search for arrow, I get this linear arrow, and I can drag that over here to geometry. Now, I want this arrow to sort of animate along the length of a spline. And in general, when you're going to be aligning something to something else, you want that thing to be along the z-axis, so pointing like this. But I also want it usually to be flush against the YZ plane. So right now we've got half of that, but we don't have the whole thing. So I'm going to add a transform node. Transform geometry, I'm just going to drag it on the wire right here. And I'm going to, for my selection string here, type in all. So I'm getting all of the points. And I'm going to rotate on bank like so. So 90 degrees. We'll animate it like so. So now I've got my formula. And I've got my arrow that is facing in the correct direction. So what I need to do is to get a point along the path here, the point along my formula spline, and use it to transform my arrow onto it. You know, with my arrow, I might even want to center this. So I'm going to add a geometry axis modifier. And that's just going to center my, my axis. I'm going to get rid of that extra wire. So now it'll be rotating from the center here. Now, in order to figure out the position along a spline, and I'm realizing that I want to see both of these at the same time. So what I'm going to do is add a connect, a node right here, and I'm going to output this onto that. So now I can see my spline and I can see my arrow. So what I want to do is sample a position along my spline. So I want to say, you know, where am I along the length? Am I here? Am I over here? Am I over here? Am I over here? And in order to do that, I can search for spline. And one of these is going to be the evaluate spline node. And if I drag that onto my wire right here, or just connect it up manually, I get a position and a tangent output. So with that position, I can feed that in as a transform on my linear arrow. So I'm just going to add another transform node. And I'm going to drag that onto the wire here. And I'm going to take the position and directly connect that to the transform. So it's just taking the position here and turning it into a transformation matrix. So it is currently at the start of my spline. And if I want, I can click on Evaluate Spline, and I can adjust how far along the spline this is happening. So the Evaluate Spline is doing a good job of doing this. And then I also have this tangent here. And a tangent on a spline, you can kind of think of as the sort of the direction that it's facing at a given instant. Let me zoom out a little bit so it's a little bit easier. So if you were to imagine drawing like Bezier tangents on this curve, how would you have to draw them? So these are the tangents. These are roughly the direction that the spline is facing at a given point. So for a given position, there's also a tangent associated with it. So that's all well and good, but this is just a vector in space. It's just a single direction. That's not enough information for us to do a full transformation, at least by default, right? If I was to, it's not a rotation value. It's just it's a tangent. So if I was to drag this into my transform on rotation, for example, I mean, something would happen, but it wouldn't really make any sense. It's just sort of doing a random wiggle as we move it along. So we have to find a way to turn this tangent into an actual rotation matrix. And lucky for us, there is a node that is built specifically for that. So if I go in here and I double click, I can search for it because I don't know the name, but you can also go to the math section here, and it's one of the top ones. It is alignment. And you can, the way you might remember this is think of the align to spline tag. Well, this is the align to direction node. So the tangent, that sort of painted line going in the direction of the spline, that's the same thing as the thing that we want to sort of orient right now. So the axis, if I set this to Z, right, we're trying to orient the Z axis. And you know what? I'm actually a little bit unclear on whether it's the direction or the orientation that I want to use right now. And whenever I get stuck on something like this, I like to right click and choose Show Help. And then that's going to bring up the user manual and give me the information that I need. So here, direction. Here you can define the direction in which the matrix axis should be aligned. This can, for example, be the directional vector to a target point. So I'm pretty sure direction is where we want to plug in our tangent. And then the orientation here is an additional vector that you can use to define the position of the axes that are not defined by direction. So we have one direction, but what's the other? If you keep reading, what you're going to find out is that if we set the axis to Z, the orientation here is going to allow us to adjust the y-axis of our arrow and the way that that should point. So I'm going to plug in my tangent to direction, and then my orientation here, I am going to use what's called an up vector. And it's called an up vector because it is pointing upwards, right? So this is the up vector, this is the up vector, whoops. It's just pointing straight up. It has no relationship really to this spline. And here, let's say we've got I'm going to paint these green so we can see it a little bit more clearly. So let's say at this point right here, the up vector is pointing up like so. The tangent, let's say, right, because that's going to be the z-axis, is pointing roughly like so. And it's a little bit hard to make out, so I'm going to make that just a little bit lighter. So our z-axis is facing this way, perpendicular to these two, right? So if we were to sort of sketch a plane made by these two axes, perpendicular to them is our x-axis. And then once we've got our actual x-axis calculated, we'll be able to automatically generate, using this alignment node, the real sort of y-axis here. And this guy, our up vector, let's just pretend it's sort of like yellow color that is kind of helping us out. So my orientation here, all of that to say, I want to set this middle value to y1, which is the direction up. And personally, I like to add a value node, like so, and change the type to a vector, y plus up, or up vector y plus, and then I'll plug that in right here. So now I've got an alignment matrix, and if I wire that in like so, and I adjust my evaluate spline, we can see, well, it is swinging around, but it's no longer adjusting the position. So what I need to do is use this alignment to set my overall transform, unfold that, and then bring in my translation here. And now when I evaluate my spline, I've got it animating or moving along here and orienting as it does so. So to summarize, the align to spline tag is what you should do if you just want to animate an object in the Objects Manager. It's going to be faster, easier for you, and it's also going to handle motion blur and so forth more easily. If, however, you were trying to construct geometry from scratch using scene nodes, this is the setup that you would use. You'd use an evaluate spline to get a position and a direction along a spline. You'd use your alignment node to generate a transformation matrix for a direction. And when you do so, you're going to want to give it an up vector of y plus. And in addition, when you're trying to orient something, you generally want to have it facing z forward. You want to have it flush against the yz axis or the yz plane there. And if you want, you can also center it to adjust how this looks as it moves along. And there you go. That is a brief introduction to the alignment node and its ability to allow you to create these sorts of animated align to spline effects. This animation here is just being driven by some time and a little bit of math here. So there you go. That's the alignment node, and I hope that this is helpful. And if you create something based on this tutorial, I'd love to see it. Please post a link. And if you've got any questions, please go ahead and post them as comments. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.